Okay, perfect. Welcome everyone to tonight's nutritional download. So my name is Callan Augusted. I'm the dietitian with ISU Dining. And tonight we have an awesome conversation about fiber. And my student assistant, so the Special Diet Kitchen and Nutrition Student Assistant Manager, Sierra Weldon, will be giving tonight's presentation about fiber. And so just for all of you to know, we are just flipping roles if you've tuned in before. So Sierra will be giving the presentation and then I will be monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions throughout the entire discussion webinar, put that in the chat box. I will be monitoring that. I might be answering some questions in there during the presentation. And then any of the most common themes that I see, I'll bring up afterwards in the question and answer discussion part of the presentation. So anything that you have related to today's conversation or any other questions that you might have, do please put that in the chat box as I'll be monitoring that throughout the entire presentation tonight. So apart from that, kind of like a little bit of housekeeping, Sierra, I will turn it over to you.
Awesome. Okay, hi everybody. My name is Sierra and I'm currently Callan's nutrition assistant. And so my role here is the Special Diet Kitchen Student Assistant Manager. And so a big part of what I do is to help manage the Special Diet Kitchen for students on campus with allergies and special dietary restrictions. And so tonight's presentation is going to be a little bit about fiber. It will probably last about 15 to 20 minutes and then we'll have our chat at the end like Callan said. And if you're unfamiliar with the Nutritional Download, it's a monthly presentation series put on by Callan and myself. And we just kind of cover different nutrition topics and then have Q&A chats afterwards. And everything that we have is posted onto the ISU Dining website. And so you can go back and look at some of our past presentations that we've had. And then this one will be posted after as well. So as Callan mentioned, my name is Sierra, and I'm currently a senior studying dietetics, and I'm the nutrition assistant. And then Callan, of course, is our ISU Dining Registered Dietitian, and I've got her social media up below at ISU Dining RD on Instagram if you're interested in checking her out on social media. She posts a lot of fun pictures of her lunch and different ways that you can add nutrients to some of your meals. Okay, so what is fiber? So fiber is something that you see a lot of times on nutrition labels, and you probably have heard of what fiber is, but it's a carbohydrate and it's found in plants, and it is used in the plants for providing support and structure, and kind of the two main compounds that are responsible for giving the plant structure and support are called cellulose and lignin. And you might have heard about these in like an intro biology class or something. But these are kind of the two main structural components of our fiber. Fiber is not digested by the body, so it passes through our GI tract completely intact. And it is important for regulating our digestion, for gut function. So you might have heard of like prebiotics or probiotics. And so it's important for fueling some of that bacteria in our gut so we can help digest and break down some food, but also it kind of contributes directly to the bacteria that we do find in our gut. And then it's important for heart health and cholesterol and for lowering our blood sugars. So a little bit about the structure of fiber. So this slide is a little bit, it's nothing you need to take away as an important piece from tonight's presentation, but I really like the science behind a lot of nutrition, and so I thought this might be interesting for some of you who really like science. So the structure of fiber, as I mentioned, it has cellulose and lignin as two kind of the key components that make up the structure in the plant cell wall. And so cellulose is made up of non-starch polysaccharides, which is just chains of simple sugars. And so you can see that picture on the left there, kind of describing and showing some imagery related to what that might look like in the plant cell wall. And then lignin is another fiber, and that is not made of sugars. And so that is usually contributed to the woody texture that we find in different fruits and vegetables like celery or rhubarb. and that kind of contributes the stringiness that you might get when you cook down celery, or when you take a bite of celery and you get some of that stringiness in your teeth. That is the lignin, which is a source of fiber. So there are two types of fiber. We've got soluble fiber and insoluble fiber. And so soluble fiber, that is going to dissolve in water and it's going to form a gel. And so it kind of, when you think of like oatmeal, when it absorbs water, it does that inside of your GI tract. And so that's why it's important for lowering blood sugar and cholesterol, because it absorbs all that water, which makes it slower for blood sugar to pass through and get to your blood. And then it's also important for keeping full. And then insoluble fiber, that's not going to dissolve in water. And so that's going to be unchanged in the GI tract and kind of speed things up. So it's important for colon health and gastric motility, and then also easing constipation, because it does go right through your GI tract without dissolving any of that water. So here's just an image kind of showing the differences between the two types of fiber, different ways that you can get them from different foods. And so again, that insoluble fiber, because it's not going to absorb that water, that's going to help ease constipation and support colon health and gut bacteria. So as you can see, there different sources would be like nuts, whole grains, things like that. And then soluble fiber, again, I mentioned like oats as a good way to think about that, absorbing all the water. And then of course, different fruits and vegetables as well. And so here is just another visual, another way to look at it. Most foods, most like fruits and vegetables or different sources of fiber, you can get both types of fiber, but usually one will be higher in soluble or insoluble than another. And so it's really important that we just remember to keep a variety of foods in our diet, because usually you won't see soluble and insoluble fibers the separate descriptions on the nutrition label. It will just say dietary fiber, and so it won't distinguish between the two. And so it's just important that you incorporate a variety in your diet and kind of mix things up so you're getting a little bit of both. And so again, we've got like the nuts, the whole grains, but then also like the oatmeal and the apples and things like that. So again, reiterating some specific foods that we might find fiber in. So soluble, the oats, apples, beans, peas, carrots. So again, thinking about it absorbing water and kind of expanding our GI tract. And then insoluble, kind of think of the foods that might be a little bit harder. So nuts, seeds, whole grains, potatoes are good sources of insoluble fiber. So the quality of fiber might differ depending on the ways that you eat your food. So fiber comes in a lot of the skins and the peels of a lot of our fruits and vegetables. And so when you take away, like peel a potato or peel an apple, you're taking away a lot of that fiber source and losing some of those really good nutrients that are super important for some of those gut functions. And so we've got kind of just an example here of a potato with the skin on it. So that's going to be the highest source of fiber. And that's going to be about 4 grams of fiber for 1 medium potato. But then if you were to peel the potato, that would be about 1.8 grams for a medium potato. And then if you mash the potato, then it would be about 1.3 grams for a 1 cup serving of the potato. So it kind of just depends on how you eat your food, the ways that you eat your food for some of the nutrients that you're getting. So that's just kind of important to keep in mind. That might be true for other nutrients as well, like steamy vegetables and things like that. So it's just important to keep in mind some of the nutrients you're getting depending on the method of preparation. So for reading a nutrition label, so I'm sure all of you have seen dietary fiber on the nutrition label, and it's under the total carbohydrates because it does provide carbohydrates in the diet, and 5% or less of the daily value. So if you look over to the right, that percentage onto the side, so this one is 14%. If it's 5% or less, that means it is a low source of that particular nutrient. And then if it's 20% or more, that means it's a high source of that nutrient. So right here, we've got 14% of dietary fiber in this 1 cup serving of this, whatever food this is. And so that's going to be higher than a low source, but it's not exactly going to meet the criteria for being a high source. So it kind of falls right in the middle there. And so 10% of the daily value, that is a good source of fiber specifically. So that would be 2.5 grams for 1 serving. So we've got a little more than 2.5 grams. We've got 4 grams. So this is considered a good source. And then 20%, which would be 5 grams, is considered a high source of fiber. So those values up there, the 5%, 20%, those are just general recommendations for any food, but down below is more specific to fiber within a serving of that food. So some general recommendations for fiber, typically it's about 25 to 35 grams a day. There's not really an RDA for fiber. It's usually just kind of, it's different for everybody. And so there are specific recommendations for men and women, but usually the general recommendation will be 25 to 35 grams a day. And then the ratio that you want to eat your soluble to insoluble fiber would be a 3-to-1 ratio. And so 6 to 8 grams from soluble fiber would be ideal out of those 25 to 35 grams that are recommended in a day. And so again, as I mentioned before, you might not see soluble and insoluble depicted, well, you won't, on a nutrition label. And so it's just really important that you're mixing up those foods, getting a variety of foods, because you likely will not be like tracking the amount of soluble versus insoluble fiber that you're consuming. And so it's just important that we are switching up a lot of the foods that we eat. So here are just a few examples of other fiber sources. I kind of put it into a chart just so it's a little bit easier to read. But you might get popcorn, so that's some grains, almonds, cauliflower, raspberries, and then they've got the serving size with the amount of fiber per serving. And a really great resource would be the Mayo Clinic. They have a list of a lot of different foods that might be high in fiber, and they give you the serving size of those as well. And so that's kind of where I gathered some of these different foods. So dietary fiber versus functional fiber, you might have heard about these. So dietary fiber is going to be the fiber that is intact in the plants that we eat. And so that's going to be just eating a piece of food that has fiber in it. And then functional fiber is going to be fiber that is isolated and then added to foods, or just isolated and sold, like you see the Metamucil here. So that's going to be extracted from a plant specifically to get the benefits of the fiber. And so Metamucil, that's something that some people sometimes take if they feel like they're not getting enough fiber in their diet. And so that's just an isolated form, and it's a functional fiber. You just add it to like a drink, and then you can increase the amount of fiber that you're eating in a day. And so a few other examples of that might be pectin, which is just another one of those structural components of a plant cell wall that can be isolated and extracted, and then inulin as well. And inulin is usually added to quite a bit of foods for its fiber effect. You might see it like in Fiber One bars or in yogurt, and that's usually extracted from chicory root. And so if you ever see chicory root on a nutrition label, that's probably because it's going to be added for a source of fiber. Okay, so a few different ways to increase your fiber. So usually fiber isn't really consumed as much as it should be in the American diet. Most Americans are low on the recommended amount of fiber. And so a few ways to increase fiber would be to add some of those functional fibers that we talked about in the previous slide, like that Metamucil or things like that. Keeping the peel and the skin on your fruits and vegetables, because it provides a lot of nutrients. And so it's important that we can incorporate some of those in our diet if we can. Adding nuts and seeds as toppings, so maybe adding those to yogurt or salads, just kind of incorporating those where we can. And then also making food swaps. So maybe instead of eating white bread, a refined grain, we might choose whole grain bread instead. And maybe instead of choosing white rice, we might choose brown rice instead. Okay, so that kind of wraps up our presentation for tonight. You can go ahead and put any questions you have in the chat box. and Callan can go ahead and read some of those off, and we can start chatting tonight about our nutrition topic for today.
Perfect. Thanks, Sierra. We do have a couple of questions coming in. So I'll kind of get started. One of them was put in right away. And so this particular person kind of writes, I've heard that I have a family history of colon polyps. I know that because of that, I should be having some more fiber to prevent that happening to me. What would you recommend?
I would say, since I'm a student, I don't know if I'm qualified to give that sort of nutrition advice, but I would say talking to a registered dietitian would be probably the first place that I would recommend that you go, because like I said, fiber is something that isn't usually consumed enough in the diet, but I wouldn't want to, cause any harm by answering the question and not feeling like I'm qualified to answer the question. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Callan, what you would think.
Yeah. So I think kind of with this, Sierra, the information that you shared earlier gives a very broad general example. And since this person hasn't been diagnosed per se, I think it's really okay to just, for you, whoever asked the question, really just know that like any form of additional fiber in your diet will be a good thing to do. So whether it's, some of those slow things that Sierra mentioned earlier of keeping your like skins on your potatoes or your apples or things like that, or just making a little bit more of a conscious effort to include a source of fiber, whether it's insoluble or soluble fiber, in each meal every day would be a great place to start.
And I know too, it sometimes is a little bit hard to kind of find that balance too, because some people really don't know like how much fiber they are consuming and they might overcompensate. So I definitely like know some people who really love like all the supplements and things like that. And so they just take a lot of fiber and they get like constipated from taking too much fiber. So you can definitely, I feel like you can overdo it if you don't have that kind of baseline education level. And so it is kind of important just to, meet with a registered dietitian and kind of learn a little bit more too.
Yeah, so we did, you mentioned like a fiber supplement, and we did have a question come in related to that. So it says like, is there a fiber supplement I should take if I think I need more fiber, or are there specific foods I should eat instead?
So I don't think there's anything bad, like wrong with supplementing, but I think if you can get a lot of your nutrients from whole foods, that's probably the preferred method to do so. And so I recommend trying to incorporate, like I said, a variety of different foods, just so you are getting your source of nutrients from some of those foods. And so again, like the soluble things like oatmeal, peas, carrots, those types of foods, and then those insoluble foods like whole grains and things like that. And maybe like going to that Mayo Clinic website or finding like different lists of foods that are good sources of soluble and insoluble fiber might be helpful for some people. So yeah, I would say whole foods all the way, all the time, if you can.
Okay. We had another question come in, and they asked, is soluble or insoluble fiber more healthy? When people say like eat more fiber, what kind do they mean?
I don't think people necessarily are thinking like soluble versus insoluble. I think it's more about just getting that variety of foods and incorporating just that dietary fiber that you see on the nutrition labels into your diet. So definitely one isn't more healthy or unhealthy. They both have different important functions in the body. So it's important that you incorporate both of those because they both do different things to help you function. And so I think yeah, just making sure to choose that variety so you're getting an adequate amount of both is really important.
I agree with that, Sierra. That was a great response to that question. Okay, so another question. This is probably coming from some sort of a biology major. But they asked, is it more common for soluble or insoluble fiber to be more available in the fibers that are made from cellulose versus lignin? So kind of what I wonder if the question is asking is like, you mentioned like cellulose and lignin earlier for like fibrous plants and
Mhm.
fibrous foods. And is soluble or insoluble fiber more common? Is like soluble more common in like lignin produce and insoluble more common in cellulose produce? I think that's what kind of they're asking is there a direct line between those different categories when it comes to cellulose, lignin, soluble and insoluble fiber?
Mhm. I actually have no idea. But just, I guess, from an educated guess, usually when I think about insoluble fiber, I'll think about those like harder foods that won't absorb water. And then when I think about soluble, I think about those foods that do absorb water. So I don't know. When I think about celery, I think of it as being like hard, but it is composed of primarily water. So I don't know if it would be soluble or insoluble associated with like lignin or cellulose, but maybe that would be something that I would have to learn in like a different biology course. But I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, um, either, Callan, but I have no
I
clue.
honestly am not sure either.
Yeah. I mean,
So
that's
again,
definitely something interesting that like we could do a little bit more research on.
mhm. I agree, like kind of whenever like for a lot of foods that do have some like typically like that insoluble fiber, again that's like that rhubarb or that
Mhm.
celery, like the woodiness, like the lignin also is kind of like those tubes, those like stringy tubes that's
Mhm.
in that woody part of the plant. And so it makes sense that there would be a connection between them, but
Mhm.
I'm really not sure about the others.
Yeah,
So
that's
that
kind of
can
where my
definitely
brain
be
was going
something.
to.
Yeah, that can be something that we can definitely look up though.
Mhm.
And to the person who asked this in the chat, if you want me to reach back out to you afterwards with anything else that Sierra and I kind of look up, let me know. Otherwise, we'll just look it up for our own education basis on that. Okay, cool. Um, We do have one more question coming in, and for anyone else, thank you again so much for joining us. If there's any other conversations or questions that you have, please put them in the chat box because otherwise we only have one more question left. So the question here says, what if I don't get the recommendation of fiber every day? Is that okay?
Um, I would say try the best you can because it does help with that gut function. But to be honest, probably a lot of people aren't getting their recommendation for the day. And I mean, we might be feeling some effects, but we might just be unaware of it. So maybe, there might be some constipation or things like that that we might just not know is related to fiber. So I would say, I mean, it's definitely not gonna like severely harm you if it's like a few days a week and you're not meeting the recommendation, but of course incorporating as much as you can to meet that recommendation is really important. So I think maybe just the awareness part of the puzzle is probably the most important part that comes into play here. But I don't know if there's any like, Callan, if you have any thoughts on like adverse effects from long-term like fiber deficiency or things like that.
When it comes to fiber, like, yeah, if you feel like you're not getting the recommendations every single day, like that's okay. That's expected. And then again, it's like if you overconsume maybe one day of fiber, that's where you might feel like a little bit more constipated or something like that. So just like don't feel like you have to completely overdo it. But just making sure that you're having like moderate amounts or pretty regular amounts in it can really be helpful. I do know that when I was in my rotations, there was a couple of people that honestly, this particular patient that I was working with they had pretty chronic colon cancer, and their colon cancer was because of residual of lack of fiber for many, many years. They were like in their 40s. only ate like 5 things. They struggled with ARFID, which is a avoidant food restrictive intake disorder, which is a type of eating disorder. And so they like didn't eat anything with any type of fiber in it. It was really just like chips, red Gatorade, some candy, and like that was it. And so they ended up developing colon cancer afterwards because of that residual and because they didn't have any fiber at all in their diet. But if it's like a couple of days, do not be concerned about that. Really, when it comes to fiber and how it interacts in our body, it's about having that medium amount every so often. And so don't overdo it, don't completely underdo it. Have it in moderation, have that variety of foods can be one of the best ways. What Sierra has mentioned, having food variety can be one of the best ways to make sure that you're getting enough fiber in your diet. Anything else you want to add to that, Sierra?
Nope, I think that was good. I'm learning things too. I didn't know about kind of the adverse effects of long-term not eating fiber, so that's interesting.
Yeah, it was sad, but okay. We did have one more question kind of pop up when you were answering the last one. And so they said, what are easy ways that I can add more fiber into my day?
I think maybe the biggest tip would be I mentioned like adding like nuts or seeds as toppings. And so if you can add, find like small ways that you can incorporate different foods on top of other foods might be a good way to do it. I know like in my salads, I really like to add seeds and nuts, but then also like to the yogurt, things like that, to oatmeal, kind of depending on how you like to, I guess, like flavor your foods, but finding those little ways that you can add different sources. And then also maybe just consciously thinking about like, oh, I'll keep the skin on my apple, or maybe I'll have like a baked potato, but I'll keep the skin on it, are also different ways that you can kind of consciously think about ways that you can increase that fiber intake as well.
Perfect. We don't have any other questions coming in. So if anyone else has any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat box. Otherwise, Sierra, do you have any other like final comments or anything that you want to share with everyone?
Nope, but I would like to say, go ahead and like check this out on the ISU Dining website if like there's anything that you feel like you missed, or if you want to check out some of the other things that we posted, feel free to do that as well. But yeah. Anything else?
Nothing comes to my mind
Okay.
right now. So yeah, there aren't any other chats coming in right now. So yeah, we'll just kind of sign off. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Give some virtual hand claps to Sierra for giving tonight's presentation and answering all of the chat questions. And we will be having one more nutritional download this semester. So that will be in April. Keep your eye out on social media, as well as the different newsletters, the Department of Residence newsletters that goes out, because that's where we kind of make sure that we put in the blurb advertising for the nutritional downloads and making sure that all of you know about it. And of course, like what Sierra just mentioned, we post all of the recordings for these onto the ISU Dining website afterwards. So you can check out today if you want to review some of the information that Sierra shared with us tonight, or if you want to check out any of the other nutritional download presentations and chats as well. Feel free to check them out there.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.